Stuart's in Finchley. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
We spoke on the 5th of July last year.
Yes.
I was a civil servant who, at that point in time, felt that things had become so dangerous with the lies that civil servants were being asked to speak on behalf of the government ministers, and particularly Prime Minister Boris Johnson at the time, had become so serious that we were living in a corrupt state. And I remember it well, yes. Yeah, I called you. The reason for my call that day was a heartfelt plea to senior civil servants in 10 Downing Street and the Cabinet Office to stop facilitating corrupt practices. Following that phone call, I was suspended from duties as a civil servant.
I didn't know that.
I was suspended for 3 months while an investigation was ongoing. Throughout that investigation, I was made to feel like a traitor or an enemy of the state. That's how I felt. And ultimately, I was sacked following a 3-month investigation.
For the call to me?
Yes.
Crikey.
Yes.
I don't know what to say.
It wasn't quite as straightforward as that. I'm honest enough to say that following the phone call, I wrote an email to Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, urging him to listen to what I said. I wanted him to hear it. So I emailed the Cabinet Secretary, and in that email, I used some language I'm not proud of.
Okay.
So that, I'll be honest in saying that was unprofessional, the manner in which I brought the call to Simon Case's attention.
Okay.
But primarily, the reason I was fundamentally sacked was for the phone call that I made, which was judged to be a breach of the Civil Service Code.
Okay. Although, I mean, you were telling me in detail about how Number 10 kept changing their story, how they would deploy press officers to do it, how they used ambiguous language, and Dominic Raab in particular, with reference to the Chris Pincher story, appeared to be saying things to the media that were,
yes,
and have subsequently been shown to be demonstrably untrue. I
stand by my phone call that day and what I did.
Yeah.
I don't regret it in the slightest.
I'm glad to hear that.
I truly believed on that day, on the 5th of July, and remember later that day is when it all unravelled. That's when the same day that Rishi Sunak and Sajid Javid both resigned, which led to the penultimate fall. What I did on that day was an act of what I still believe was true public service, of attempting to get through to senior civil servants who had influence over the government to stop facilitating corruption.
Well, it was Simon MacDonald's letter, wasn't it? That Dominic Raab trashed, and I think that was what pushed you over the edge, so to speak, when a serving cabinet minister tried to undermine the integrity of a long-standing senior civil servant publicly.
I felt at that point we had reached an extremely dangerous point for democracy, where you had the most senior spokespeople in government who were lying on behalf of ministers to save their skin, which I still believe is the indication of a failed state or a corrupt state. And I think, thankfully, ministers around the Prime Minister on that day, I think, realised it reached that point as well, which led to the downfall. Now, like everybody else in the country, I'm sure, I hoped that would be a turning point for this country in terms of sweeping away corrupt practices and poor standards of public life.
Yes.
I'm on today to say, sadly, and I'm absolutely furious and actually really upset, that we are, 6 months down the line, and absolutely nothing has changed. And we're 2 Prime Ministers down the line. We've had 2 Prime Ministers to send as well.
We have.
And absolutely nothing has changed. So you asked this morning, your listeners, of which I was one, how you feel this morning that Nadhim Zahawi still in the job. And I'm here to tell you now, I feel sick to the stomach and absolutely furious that, here's me who put my life, my job on the line for everybody else, for colleagues in civil service and for the country to say, look, guys, we have to wake up here. Wake up. This is serious. I lost my job for doing the right thing and trying to expose and highlight what is going on in this government. And I lost my job. And do you know what really upsets me?
Yeah, I do.
Nothing's changed. If I had done what I'd done, lost my job, and things had changed, you know what? I could live with that. But the fact I've done what I've done, I lost my job because of it, and yet nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. And I'm back on again today, 6 months later, to tell your listeners, we need to wake up now to this. This is corruption of the highest level. And we cannot accept this anymore. It's dangerous. It's dangerous.
It was dangerous then. And like you, I briefly thought that Sunak was going to signal some sort of... I mean, it may be too early to say that he categorically hasn't or won't, but it's certainly not looking good. Why... I mean, number one, let me talk directly to you and tell you that I understand why the absence of consequence or why you feel broken in a way by the fact that nothing has changed. But remember, you only ever answer to yourself, Stuart. You answer to your conscience. You answer to the man in the mirror, and you can look him in the eye, secure in the knowledge that you did the right thing. I wish the consequences hadn't been so severe for you, and it's horrible and heartbreaking, in fact, to hear you describe what has happened to you subsequently. But never forget the power of a clean conscience. That should comfort you in some way. Forever, frankly. I mean that. And you don't need me to tell you that my listeners derive enormous heart from simply knowing that you exist, from the call that you made that people are now remembering and talking about being moved to tears at the time. It was the Chris Pincher stuff. It was Johnson claiming he knew nothing about the fact that Chris Pincher... It all started unravelling later that day, as you remind us. And it's that looking you in the eye and telling you that it's raining when you can see the sunshine. It's the blatantness of the lie, the appallingness of the because it's contempt that they display for you, for me, for everybody when they just lie so casually. Which, oddly enough, is why I began today's show remembering Dominic Cummings. But if you don't have to do this, but I would love to know why you think Sunak isn't stepping up to the plate, because Johnson, I don't think, had much choice, as we've discussed a million times. Johnson, if he sacked somebody for misconduct, he would almost certainly have got an identical behaviour on his track record, on his CV. That's clearly not true of Sunak.
No. So, one thing that I mentioned 6 months ago, and one of the big concerns I had, which sadly seems to come to pass, is that I was worried that unless we nipped this in the bud at the time, this way of operating would become normalised. That the boundaries have been pushed so far that if we didn't rein them back in again, the standards of public life and behaviours would become normalised. And sadly, I think we reached that point because there's no consequences, there is no impunity, there is no independent checks and balances on the power of ministers and what they do in their behaviour.
How quickly did it happen, Stuart? Because you were in the ringside seat. I think you'd worked with Simon Case, hadn't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in government 17 years. And again, one thing is as it pains to stress during the investigation, and I hope it came across during my interview in July last year, is that I'm not a member of a political party. I've never been politically active. I served governments under Labour, coalition, Conservative governments. I've never had a political view. I've never been involved in politics. In many ways, I was a consummate civil servant, ultimately politically neutral. So it's telling, actually, that when you listen to some of the evidence that Simon Case has given to the public affairs committees over the months, he admits himself and has done publicly that Boris Johnson was a unique politician.
Yeah.
And does things a different way. And when we live in a democracy and a government that works on convention and guidance, and, for as long as I worked in civil service for 17 years, that system worked. That the checks and balances that we had in place that were based around guidance and kind of convention worked.
Yeah.
But when you have someone in power who doesn't really care much for convention or the way things are done previously and happy to push the boundaries and can do so with no consequences, then that renders those conventions completely unsuitable.
I remember American commentators saying that the founding fathers never really conceived of a Donald Trump coming along. It wasn't part of the plan.
Exactly right. And so there is, unfortunately, and it's been exposed now, the British Constitution is not designed to deal with a political landscape like we have right now. And I'm not smart enough to have the answers to that question.
But there must be a way back. I mean, I understand what you're saying about normalisation. So whatever Sunak is thinking privately, Zahawi is thinking, well, I can style this out. If Dominic Cummings can stand up in the Rose Garden and say that he went for a drive to test his eyesight, then I can certainly claim that the reason why I didn't pay millions of pounds in tax and I've now been fined is just down to carelessness. It's as if the truth has withered on the vine and ceased to matter. All that matters is survival. Or status and trying to cling on. It may be that Sunak is tearing his hair out in Downing Street because he did mean it when he said professionalism, accountability and integrity. I think we both gave him the benefit of the doubt for 10 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way back.
I think we had to. Otherwise, yes. I think we'd have gone mad. The country would have gone mad. We have to give people a chance now.
Yeah.
We have to start believing again that we can introduce decency and standards back into public life. We have to believe in that.
Because otherwise it's all over, right? Otherwise the game is up.
Yeah, and I think we have to keep believing. But unfortunately, I switched off. I had to switch off from politics.
Of course you did.
And I'm kind of half annoyed at myself that I've been dragged back into it today.
Oh, okay. You've done your bit.
I'm back on again to say to listeners, sadly, that we're back again so soon after the Boris Johnson government in a very dangerous place where you have very senior politicians and ministers who are acting with complete impunity. And one thing I would say about people who act without impunity and are quite happy to ignore the rules and conventions, and I think this is the biggest point and the biggest worry for us as a country, is that their primary concern is themselves.
Yes.
Not us and the electorate and people. And that is the crux of this, and
you're right.
that is why it matters.
And that's why you rang in. Because
I rang in.
You were doing the polar opposite of self-interest.
Yes. Because again, I don't know what trouble getting this now. Who knows? But anyway, I might get trouble. I might not.
I don't think you've said anything that well, also it's too late, really. It's
too late.
But you're just calling a radio show to talk over what's currently happening in terms, but the opposite of self-interest.
That's why this matters. That's why this matters, everybody. Because what this tells us, what this tells the public, is that the people in charge, who are supposed to be looking after our interests and making our lives better, improving our lives, they don't care about that. Is not their primary concern. Their primary concern is themselves.
And if they had a balance, if they previously had a bit of public service and a bit of self-interest, and you'd need to have some serious self-interest to want to go into politics, but coupled with, married to public interest, or even thinking, well, I can't get ahead without some public interest. I have to, even if you don't feel it in your waters, I'm going to have to. Johnson has taught them that they don't need any at all. You can get the highest office in the land by being dedicated solely and exclusively to your own self-interest. And that must, even by a form of behavioural osmosis, that corrupts everybody around him.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, I think you're right. I think that's tainted people around him and work with him. Everyone who comes into contact with Boris Johnson seems to be afflicted by.
It's bizarre. Well, I suppose it either you walk away or you become complicit, and by staying, you become complicit. Even Sunak, that's putting up with so much for so long, doesn't get to absolve himself of that.
And we haven't discussed the issue around Boris Johnson and the loan facilitated by the BBC chairman. Let's just put this in simple terms. I'm applying for a job with you, James. Okay.
Yeah.
You're in trouble with money.
Yeah.
You say to me, Stuart, mind help me get $800,000? That'd be real help. Don't worry, I can sort that out for you. Don't worry. Yeah, I'll sort it out. Next week, I go for an interview with you, give me a job. Tell me how that's not a corrupt process.
You've missed the bit out. You've missed the bit out where you, me, and the bloke who gave me the money go out for lunch a month later and never ever discuss it. That's what we're being asked to believe today.
I mean, that in the most basic terms, that process has been corrupted.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. And the fact that it was hidden from the public bodies and the parliamentary committees that are meant to be scrutinising the appointment makes it even worse. It was hidden, which makes it another level of corruption. And the idea that you can have a sort of, I actually kind of catch myself speaking about this. The idea that you have the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's in a tax dispute with HMRC at the time he's a Chancellor, how that cannot be a conflict. I mean, that is the definition of a conflict of interest if there ever was one.
You would think so.
And yet we're still led to believe that there's nothing to see here. Yeah. I'm sorry. There's everything to see here. It's laid bare, and it hasn't. It's not changing. It hasn't changed. It's becoming normalised, and the longer that we accept this as normal public behaviour and public standards, the worse it's going to get. Because unless we nip this in the bud now, the boundaries are going to be pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed as far as they can go, and something's going to have to give. And
you start wondering what, don't you? I do. You just start wondering what it will take, what will happen next. How are you doing otherwise?
I'm all right.
Yeah?
I've managed to find myself another job. Good. My employer's been very supportive.
Good.
I would prefer not to be dragged back into this again, but again, I just felt today the message has to get out there again.
Thank you.
And sadly, 6 months on, things haven't changed, and they need to change, and people need to understand why it matters. This matters because while this keeps happening, what this means for us is that the people in power are more worried about themselves. They care about themselves. They do not care as much as they should about the people they're trying to serve. And that's fundamentally what has to change, why it has to change, because they care about themselves, not about us.
Thank you, Stuart, for reminding all of us what public service sounds like.
Thank you, James.
Look after yourself as well. Don't listen to the show. Don't listen to the show tomorrow.
I'll try not to. Thanks.
Take care, mate. Look after yourself. Seriously. 10:53 is the time.